Janet, nice to see you again. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, everybody. We're waiting for Keylin to join us, and then we'll let people trickle in and then get going.
Hey,
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. I love the festive sweater.
Thank you. It's actually, just to show it to everyone, Darth Vader.
Oh, very nice. An empirical Christmas.
Yes,
Cool. So we'll let some people trickle in for just a moment, and then we'll get going.
for sure. I actually just saw one of my friends from university join. Hi, Stuart.
I have to say, I also got a really funny question to add from my story earlier. So I'm
Okay,
looking forward to that.
okay. I'm stoked. Let's do it.
I think it's somebody who knows you very well.
Oh gosh. Okay. That'll be interesting.
Oh yeah. I love the little Christmas houses you have behind you as well.
Oh, thank you. Oh, I actually didn't bring my lights. I typically have my Christmas lights going behind me. I love the fire that you've got going on your end. That's very
Oh,
cozy.
thank you. Yes. Unfortunately, it doesn't let off any heat, but it's probably for the best.
Yeah, that's okay. Don't
No,
burn the house down.
yeah. Tomorrow I hope to move into the room with the real fireplace for the full live event. So,
Nice. That'll be super fun.
oh yeah. Well, I think we can go ahead and get started, and then let people just trickle in as they will. But I'll do an introduction, and then we'll get into the questions and such.
For sure.
So, hello everyone. Welcome again to the 12 Days of the Delivery Company. This is day 11 of 12. So, thank you so much for those of you who have been joining me every day. I want to say special shout out to you all. And for those of you who are just joining, welcome to the event. Every day I interview a different author or any publishing professional. And at the end, we give away one of their books or resources. So stick around for some exciting things. Tonight, I'm pleased to interview Keylin Rivers. Welcome.
Thanks so much, Lane. Appreciate you having me on here. And I can't. I just have to say I'm very excited for your novel to come out tomorrow.
Tomorrow, yeah.
Tomorrow. Well, I know tomorrow's your launch party. I know
Yeah.
tomorrow's your launch party. So yeah,
Yeah,
very
tomorrow's the
excited.
launch event, and everything is officially out tomorrow.
Yeah.
So just to give everybody an idea of who you are, I'm going to read your bio here. Keylin Rivers is a science fiction and fantasy author living in Montreal, Quebec. She couldn't pick a favorite color when she was a child because it would hurt all the other colors' feelings. She eats her pizza backwards, got to get all the tough stuff out of the way. And she wholeheartedly believes in the Oxford comma. I agree. So without further ado, welcome, Keylin.
Thank you. Yes, I wholeheartedly believe in the Oxford comma. I will. That is a hill I will forever die on.
I love seeing all the memes with the Oxford commas included and not included, when they show the pictures.
Yeah.
Always good. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, where you're living now, where you're spending your quarantine, and what life has been like during the last 9 months.
I mean, yeah, quarantine, eh? So right now I am in Montreal. I'm actually originally from Toronto, or a suburb of Toronto, Mississauga, so just outside of there. And I've kind of spent almost half and half my life between Toronto and Montreal, mostly Toronto though. So I'm living in Montreal now, a suburb of Montreal. Actually, used to live right downtown, and really have been spending quarantine here. Have been spending quarantine trying to write, but actually spending a lot of time on Zoom calls, which, it is what it is. For anybody else who's a little bit sick of Zoom, like, we're all in the same boat. But it's been going well enough. I mean, I feel very fortunate to still have a job and not face like extreme kind of struggles during these times, as I know lots of people are. So very fortunate about that. But on the writing front, going not so well. It's been very busy at work lately, and I haven't really gotten much time to work on writing. So
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. I know. I mean, this time you would think that having a lot of time downtime at your house and working from home would give you more time, but I feel like it's almost the opposite sometimes because you spend so long working on the computer for other reasons. Now you don't really want to be at the computer anymore.
totally,
And
yeah.
um, So speaking of your writing, I'd love to know a little bit more about you as a writer, as an author. And first off, how long have you been writing, both informally and now formally?
So I feel like, okay, so I I actually told my friend that I tell this story on my YouTube channel and he didn't mind, so I'm going to go ahead and tell the story. But I recall vividly, I've always enjoyed writing and I've always enjoyed reading, but I think the first time that I ever took writing super seriously was in grade 5. And we had an assignment to write a book and we had to draw the cover and all these things. And I mean, it was handwritten, it wasn't typed. Um, and I remember my book was long. It was like 50 pages or something like that. And it had images and a cover. And I was like, I'm so excited. This is like such a great novel. It was not a great novel, spoiler alert. It was awful. But I remember going to class and handing it in and being so excited. And then one of my really wonderful friends, who I don't know, I don't think he's here. I don't see his name here, but he brought in his story and it was longer than my story. And I was like, the audacity of this person writing a story that is longer than my story. Because I figured, like, I guess my grade 5 brain was just like, I want to write like a novel, you know? So
Yeah.
the fact that he wrote a longer story than me, just like, oh, it still irks me to this day. And so anyway, that's also, I suppose, when I found out I was very competitive, but you know, so I mean, I've written since then. I wrote kind of my first full length novel in high school. I wrote several different versions of it. I wrote the first version in first person and then switched it to third and then back to first. And then I got super deep into fan fiction. Like fan fiction was like an addiction of sorts. I remember like spending all night reading fan fiction and being like, oh shoot, I should go to bed. And my indication was the sun was coming up. So unhealthy, not good. Like that's not a good way to, I suppose, go about fan fiction. And then I started writing fan fiction. It was kind of the same thing. I used it a little bit as an escape, I suppose, during like a part of my life that I was just finding a little bit difficult. And I just have such fond memories of like going to the cafe on the corner of my street, which I love cafe writing. It's my favorite.
Same.
And sitting down and just they like writing my fan fiction. I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm studying, but that wasn't true. I was sitting in the cafe writing fan fiction. I'd tell everybody I was studying so they wouldn't bother me. The cafe owner knew me. It was so great. I loved it. And that basically spent a whole bunch of time writing fan fiction. And I think fan fiction is such a wonderful place for people to start their writing journeys. And so then I basically moved, I guess I decided I wanted to write professionally, or like I wanted to write in kind of the capacity of writing my own original work, probably while I was doing my master's. And I recall starting the story that is now All the King's Traitors at that point in time. Then I got a job, went into the real world. That was on pause a little bit. And I went back and I did a kind of mentor-mentee writing program with Humber College in Toronto. And I was a mentee. And then eventually I wrote a book. And that's the story. It just kind of was gradual, I suppose. And I think I picked a time in my life when I was ready to write a book, to start like writing a book more professionally. But before that, it was all just passion and fan fiction, I suppose.
No, I love that. And in fact, in the comment section, we've had a couple people yaying for fan fiction. Adam is saying sometimes the fan fiction is better than the original, which is hilarious when that's actually very true sometimes, unfortunately. But without the original, you can't have the fan fiction, right? So there's at least a little bit of a, yeah. And Dan is asking if you find Wattpad to be a good way to start as well.
So I have a whole spiel about Wattpad. So I personally have never used Wattpad other than just like I'm on Wattpad and I think I posted like one or two things. But I personally never used it because I'm from the fanfiction.net era. Wattpad was just like in its infancy when I was writing fanfiction. So, I mean, if Wattpad, I know does fan fiction, it does original fiction. I know you can like make money on Wattpad too. So I personally think Wattpad's a great place to start. I wouldn't publish anything on Wattpad if you want to submit it to a traditional publisher. I would not do that. That's just my personal advice because they always want to be the first ones to put something out. So if you want to traditionally publish, I would not put what you want to traditionally publish on Wattpad. Put whatever else you want on Wattpad. Go for it. Wattpad seems to be like fair game with everything. But the reason I am so kind of excited about Wattpad is because working at Wattpad, I think would probably be one of my dream jobs. And they're headquartered in Toronto. And I actually applied for a job with them and didn't hear anything back. So if anybody watching works for Wattpad, you know, send me an email.
I love that.
I've got a job that I really love. But yes, Wattpad would be a great place to start.
No, and I love that, and the fact that it is kind of important to know too that some places will consider that to be published, right? Since it's online and written, and it's definitely a good place to build a platform and a following rather than a place to put out finished work, rather, right? So, now I do have a couple of additional questions coming in, which I love. I'll touch on InDesign's question in just a moment, but MC is asking both, what would you do if fan fiction is better than your book?
That's a great question.
As in, if fiction came out based on your book that is better, he says.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably, to be totally honest, I would like to think that I would not read any fan fiction about my book because I would like to think that I wouldn't read it because I would not want anything to potentially influence what I did with the story. And I can imagine that, like, even if you consciously, like maybe unconsciously it would. I would like to think that I wouldn't read any fan fiction that came out, although that's like the dream. I wish someone would write fan fiction about my book. That's the dream. But if I did read it, which honestly I probably would because I would be so excited that somebody wrote fan fiction about my book and it was better than my book, then like kudos to that person because they just like knocked it out of the park. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have to agree a little bit, but also I think disagree in a little way because I personally would probably reach out to this person and form a sort of James Patterson-esque relationship with them in the sense that like I will say, okay, you are aware that I have created this intellectual property that is the universe and characters you've used, but I would gladly take you on as a co-author for a sub-series or other series within the genre and story universe because I think there would be some good money to be made if they're doing that well with the fan fiction. Let's get at least have the owner of the world make a little bit off of it, but also let you do your thing.
Totally. And I mean, I mean the fan fiction, like I'm assuming they wouldn't be charging for it because if they were charging for it, that'd be probably an issue. But
yeah,
I completely agree with you, and I completely agree with you. I think what we're seeing now with authors opening up their worlds and inviting other people to write in their worlds is like the coolest thing. Like that's so cool. And it's not something that I think, well, I mean, I don't actually know, but I think it's happening more often now than it ever has before. And like, how cool is that? I think that's like such a cool idea. Yeah. Find someone who writes great fan fiction of your books and then bring them on. That's a great idea.
And I know from listening to a podcast I'd recently heard, I think it was through the Creative Pen, she was interviewing someone who he has, like, I don't even know how many people he has employed with him, but they run a publishing house that started as indie publishing, and they're still self-publishing, but they've employed all these people to write within the world, and he has like final edits on it, but they have, and it hits all genres too, like, he has certain things, but he's got all these people working for him, and they make money, and they make good money, but he's also able to put out a good number of books every year. I think he put out like 200 books this last year because of the number of people that are working with him.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I actually was listening to something similar. It might have been the same company, but it was a company from the UK, and they were being interviewed on the self-publishing formula, I believe. And it was the same thing. They basically had a whole bunch of people writing in the same world, same universe, because then the read through increases, right? Like if I read one book, then I'll go to another. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, and that read through is really important, I think, and which is why everyone, when you're first starting out in indie publishing, especially, everybody's like, write a series, don't write a standalone, write a series. So, um, but speaking of All the King's Traitors, that is your debut into the indie publishing world, right? How did that feel? ImDesign was asking earlier, how did you feel when you first published this book and had your story out there for the world, and what sort of emotions did you go through, and what sort of feedback did you get?
It's a really good question. I think it was honestly a drawn out process. I mean, I was very excited when my book got published, but it was a drawn out process. And the reason for that was because there was a error on the paperback version of the, like, a technical error, not an error in the novel, but a technical error with the actual file itself. And so all of the proofs looked 100% okay. And it was like good to go. I had no issue with the proofs. And then upon publication of the paperback, all of a sudden there was an error, and the technical team at the print on demand company had to get involved. And it was this whole massive thing. Anyway, it was all resolved, but it felt a little bit drawn out because it was like the ebook went up first. And then because of the error, even though all the proofs were okay, we didn't understand what was going wrong. The paperback had to go up later. So it was drawn out. That being said, upon the publication of the paperback, that was, I think, the moment when I was like, wow, this is like real and happening and done. And I'm so excited.
Yeah.
And then I think I went through, like, I personally read not all my reviews, but I read reviews. I actually think that it's quite good for an author to read reviews, because you'll figure out where your weaknesses are. Obviously, don't take them to heart, but and don't comment on them. Do not comment on your reviews for anybody watching. But I then started reading the reviews, and people were really receptive of it, and I think that was really exciting. I also actually pursued Kirkus Indie Review, and they reviewed All the King's Traitors really well, which was also kind of like a moment where I was like, wow, okay, I can really do this. So that was really, really nice. But it was also a little nerve-wracking. Like, it's a little nerve-wracking putting something that's like your heart and soul out into the world for people to read and critique. So.
Oh, for sure. And I know, as we're on the eve of my publication, fully released into the world, I've already gotten a few ARC reviews, which have been nothing but amazing. Surprisingly, I was actually very surprised that a couple of them that I thought were going to be very critical were not as disappointed as I thought they would be, for unknown reasons. You know, I think we all think when we put a book out there, everybody's going to hate it, even though we hope they love it and buy it. It's a weird paradox I feel like we're stuck in.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think as you said, it's important for us to read the reviews, but take them lightly, and just know that some people are going to love certain things, and some people are not going to love certain things. So
yeah,
but
yeah, read the reviews and not comment on them. I can't tell you how many times I've seen in, like, a Facebook group or something where an author screenshots a review and posts it and complains about the review, and I'm like, no,
oh, no.
Don't do that. So please, anybody watching, don't do that.
Yeah. I will steer clear of commenting. I did comment on my my ARC readers Goodreads reviews just to say thank you, and book 2 is coming, so don't worry, because they were all, mostly it was like, the only critique I have is I want more, and I'm like, well, don't worry, there will be more. So
no, I just mean I've seen one too many author groups, someone take a very negative review and then post a rant about it, and I'm
oh,
like,
no. Yeah,
so please don't do that to anyone.
Not good. Yeah, 0 out of 10 would recommend.
0 out of 10.
So I would also love to know a little bit more about your writing style, like when and where you write primarily. Are you a plotter, a pantser?
Yeah, so that's a really interesting question, because it's developed over time, and I think I've gotten into my routine because I am a pantser. But the problem is I can't like rein it in when it comes to my pantsing, meaning that I like it would be a never ending process for me if I didn't have some structure. So what I do now is I pants and I let myself discovery write the first draft, or what I call a zero draft. So I'll discovery write that, and then I'll take that and I'll outline it, and then I'll make all of the changes in my outline that I want to make. And then I go back and redraft or edit, but a lot of the times it's redrafting. And the way this process developed was when I was working with my editor for All the King's Traitors. She provided me with like I forget what she called it, but it was kind of like an outline. It was in a table, and I was like, wow, this is really great. And so now I make all of my outlines in Excel. I'm like really weird like that. So I'll discovery write, and I need that creative freedom, and then I literally go into Excel, which is like the exact opposite of that. And I'll rearrange everything.
No, I love that. I used to be an entirely just a pantser right at the beginning, until I got about 3 drafts in and realized I can't do this to myself every time. Because I had gotten up to like 4 or 5 drafts, I think, by the time I finally figured everything out and nailed down all the plot holes and things like that. So, and just for me, I just didn't want to do that every time. So now I'm more of the planter where I have a okay outline by chapter, and then free roam in between while working on each chapter. But
Totally.
and of course, always open to discovery if the characters somehow decide that they want to go a totally different way, which happens more than you'd like, I feel like sometimes. But but it usually ends up for the better. So that's the good part.
I will say, I mean, I say I'm a discovery writer, just how you described it there, but I typically have an idea for a novel, and I'll like jot it down in notebooks, and like not even by chapter, just like jot the idea down so I don't forget it. And I typically, though, going into a novel, have an idea of how it's going to end.
Okay, yeah, same.
Yeah.
I think, and I wonder if you do this too. Before we move on, I also have kind of like an opening image and an end image in mind, almost like you're watching the movie and you know the last scene and the first scene. Do you feel like you do the same?
I do. So I actually, I typically. So one of the things that I find interesting because of discovery writing, my ends typically don't change from the first draft, or I mean, they're edited and they get better, but they typically like don't change because I have a really clear picture of that by the time I get to the end of the discovery write. I'm like, I have an idea at the beginning, and then I discovery write, and then it becomes more and more clear. My beginnings, while I always have an idea going into the discovery draft, like I have that image, they change much more than the end. Like the beginning to All the King's Traitors is, I don't even think the same beginning, like it's not the same beginning. But going into that first draft, yes, I do have a picture of the beginning, but that's not to say it doesn't change.
Okay, yeah, interesting. And yeah, I'll touch on that later, because it deals with plot and such. But so what drew you specifically to the genre of fantasy, and more so in the age group of young adult?
So that's a great question. And so I personally read young adult fantasy, but I really just enjoy fantasy and sci-fi. I always have. I mean, the fan fiction that I wrote was Dragon Ball Z fan fiction. I know that's not really.
That's awesome.
I know that's anime, but that's the fan fiction I wrote. So I've always kind of been drawn to the more sci-fi, fantastical, out of this world kind of stuff. I think a really big influence for me too was Christopher Paolini, when I was younger, who wrote the Aragon book, The Inheritance Cycle. And I think like I read that when I was a kid, and so I thought that like he was a teen author, and like I don't know, I just thought it was the most amazing thing. So I think that was a big influence too. But all the stories I've always really enjoyed have been fantasy and sci-fi.
That's great.
And then young adult. So that's a little bit because I read young adult, but actually with All the King's Traitors, it's a young adult epic fantasy. But a lot of people have said to me, you know, like this, like they would put it in young adult or adult. And so with All the Queen's Renegades, I'm actually, because my audience, even though All the King's Traitors is young adult, tends to be adult. Not tends to be, like 99% of my audience is adults when like reading my book. Even though it is young adult. So all the Queen's Renegades is aged up just a little bit. It still feels like a young adult, but the content is more adult. So I'm still working on how I'm going to categorize it. We will see.
And I have some people in the comments loving that you're super into DBZ. So I think that's great. And I also used to play those video games growing up and watching it. So love that series. But
okay, well, who's your favorite?
I used to love Vegeta. I was a big Vegeta fan. I remember owning the action figure.
And the right answer is Vegeta. So
I love that. I had the action figure at recess remote. I don't know why I remember this, and this is like the only thing I can remember from like middle school that's like this impactful. But like I took it to school to like play with friends and like be like, he's so cool, look at this, and like threw him up in the air to fly, and I like couldn't see when he came back down. And he came back down, and he broke his foot off, like the golden boot was broken off, and I was like, no. I guess my power was over 9,000, but
yeah. Yeah.
And I have to say, now that I know that you're really into Dragon Ball Z, I can kind of see a little bit of inspiration, I think, in your fight scenes, specifically the opening one. So I don't know if that's an interesting parallel that I'm just drawing from this conversation, or if you feel like that actually comes from
you're 100% right. And actually, when I wrote Dragon Ball Z fan fiction, one of the things that people used to say about my fan fiction was that I wrote fight scenes very well. Also, Valak, who is a character in All the King's Traitors, his name is to pay homage to my fave, Vegeta. So, yeah,
that's awesome. And I have to say, before we get too much into the book, I think he's my favorite character. So that's not what I expected, but I will stick with that.
He was my favorite character. I will say he was my favorite character when I first started writing, and then I now have a new favorite character. And I know some people, if I have any of my friends or family watching right now, will be shocked if I tell them who this new favorite character was, because I hated them at the beginning. But they're my new favorite. So
I would take a guess, but I don't want to say any more names unless if we don't have to. So. But I know, I don't want to risk spoiling anything.
No, it's all good.
But I do want to ask, well, InDesign is asking, do you base any of your characters on people in real life?
No, I don't. And I also, I don't really base characters off people in real life. And I also don't like, Valak's not really based on Vegeta. I just really like V names. I think it sounds really cool. And they're both similar, but I don't base characters on people in real life. I think there's very typical, I think there's typical characters when it comes to a fantasy or when it comes to sci-fi. And obviously your job as an author is to kind of turn that on its head a little bit and play with that. But there is there's the hero and there's like an antagonist, and they all have different kind of traits that are typical of fantasy and sci-fi. So that's where all of the characters seem to come from. But I don't think I've ever based a character on someone I know in real life. I do have characters in my books who have the same names as people I know in real life. And someone once actually brought that up to me, and I was like, oh no, I just think they're beautiful names. That's why they're in the book. So yeah, no, never based someone off a character in real life.
Speaking of characters, I actually had this written down, but Adam messaged in the comment section. Which do you usually craft first, the characters or the plot? When it comes to idea creation, at least, yeah.
Neither. It's the world. The world always comes to me first. The world, the magic system. I personally have a background in science and engineering, like an academic background in science and engineering. And so I think that one of the things and if you notice, All the King's Traitors is a hard fantasy. I have written a sci-fi that's not published, and it's a hard sci-fi because I like to have the world and the laws of the world and what the world's going to look like all established. And so that actually comes to me first, and probably then plot, and probably then characters.
I mean, that's an interesting thing to talk about because I remember talking with another author in the past 11 days. I don't remember exactly which one, but we were chatting how, you know, their characters are important, plot is important, but the setting is also a character in itself and often comes into play, especially I feel like in fantasy and sci-fi more so than other genres. But it's good for people to hear that, to know that, and I can tell that your world definitely there's definitely some importance to having your world fully fleshed out, especially when there's people in all different places within the world and things are going on everywhere. So
Yeah.
it almost feels to me like a D&D campaign that you've crafted, you know, in your head, that like you're like, okay, this group is over here, this campaign's going on over here, and I have to ask because I've asked almost everybody, do you play D&D?
I don't, but I want to so badly. I was doing a writing sprint live stream on YouTube. And for anybody watching right now, I have a YouTube channel where I talk about writing, but I was doing a live stream and people in the chat were talking about D&D and I was like, I feel so excluded right now. I want to play D&D. So I don't, but I want to.
That's awesome. I don't mean to go back a little bit, but M Design is asking if we can chat just a little bit more about writing process, publishing, picking covers, editors, etc. for first-time publishers. Do you want to talk a little bit more about your process specifically and how you looked into that?
Yeah, sure. So I found what I did, and one of the best pieces of advice that I ever received when it comes to self-publishing is, if you want, find your favorite book. Do I have a book here that's not All the King's Traitors? Find your favorite book. Ideally a self-published book if you're planning to self-publish. That is like, this is my favorite self-published book. I love it. And then go to the copyright page and see who edited and see who designed the cover for that book. If you love the cover, you could pick different books. Let's say you have a book that you really love the cover for. Go to the copyright page, see who designed it. Let's say there's one that you're like, wow, this is written so clean and I love the like style and all this stuff. Go and see who the editor was. That was one of the best pieces of advice I got, because that is how I found my editor. So what happened was I reached out, I found a book I really liked. I opened it, I went to the copyright page, I reached out to the editor. That editor was unavailable, but they were like, hey, I'm mentoring someone. They're cheaper than me. They have availability. Why don't you go with this person? And so I did. And shout out to my editor, Amanda. She is a genius. I love her so much. And then for the cover design, well, they didn't redirect me. They were like, yeah, we can do your cover. So that is my biggest piece of advice. Find a book that you like, go to the copyright page, and all of that information is there. And then you can just go ahead and use that information to get started on finding all of the folks that you need to help support your book. My second piece of advice would be a lot of services can be very, very expensive. Do what you can afford. Don't go into debt to publish your book, because I put a lot of this on my credit card and man, do I regret that. So that is another piece of advice. I know pursuing your dreams is very fun and exciting, but like, honestly, if you can just wait a little bit longer, save up a little bit more, or go with a service that might be a little bit cheaper, spend more time trying to find something that's a little bit cheaper, but of equal quality. That is another piece of advice that I would give you as well.
Absolutely. And I'd love to add just a little bit onto that, in that, and I think I mentioned this in the one where we chatted a little bit about the services side of things, but if you're going to look into specifically editors for your book, I would look at the same, a similar genre if you can, or age group. Specifically with YA, there's a lot of editors out there who have never touched YA, and there's a lot of editors who specifically, like, YA is what they do. And if you can find somebody who you love the writing style and YA is what they do, 100% would go with them, so that you can also know that you're getting market, like trend. Your writing will look like the professional YA writing, style wise, at least, comparatively.
100%, especially when it comes to YA. I really like that piece of advice because I don't know what it is, but YA has like a YA vibe. And so it does. Like, there's just this feeling you get when you read YA. So, like, having an editor who specializes in that will be a huge, huge help. I was going to add another point on. You actually reminded me of something, but I can't recall what it was. Oh, always get a sample edit, and always, for any part of the book publishing process, that you're hiring someone, get a contract. So whether it's with your cover designer, whether it's with your editor, so that you understand and they understand what services they're going to provide, what services you're going to expect, and how much it costs. Mm-hmm. And then you can always fall back to that if there's some sort of like issue that you have to resolve.
I love that. And last thing on this a little bit, I would just like to add that sometimes it's okay to take a risk or a chance on somebody that you trust, even if that somebody has not typically done the work in that area. If you know that person, you trust that person, and they do great quality work in any other area that's similar, reach out to them, see if they're willing to do it, and then get a sample, of course, and you know, see how you work. But I found some of the best people that are not well known for doing what they've done for me, but I would not have picked anyone else. And it's been such a great process for the both of us, because, you know, we learned throughout the process together, and I feel like I got such a stronger product because of that.
100%. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And there's also wonderful resources like sites you can use to find folks, like Readsy or even Upwork or Fiverr. Again, just going back to what you said though, get the sample, make sure you trust them, you're vibing well with them, and all of that stuff. And there's really great resources out there.
Pass the vibe check. You should be okay.
Pass the vibe check.
To talk like the children. But so back into the sci-fi or the fantasy side of things with you, and your book specifically. I'd love to know a little bit more about your magic system and the hard magic of your world, because I personally, like I said, I've read the book and I understand it fairly well, but I'd love to hear more about the process of creating it, and also just a little bit more detail about it.
Okay, so in book one, the magic system. So I actually, let's start with how it was created. It kind of came to me all at once. And so in all the King's Traitors, there are stones that are called God stones that essentially they fall from the sky. And the first thing in like a meteor shower, or independently, kind of like a meteorite. So they fall from the sky, and the first thing that they touch, they absorb the power to kind of control. And so if you're the first person that then touches the Godstone after that, you become the owner basically of that Godstone. And it only really responds to your command. There's certain exceptions to that rule. And it only really responds to your command, and basically you can wield whatever the first thing the Godstone touches. So let's say a stone falls to earth, the first thing it touches is dirt, then the person can control that particular dirt. It is very specific. Like if it falls and it hits like a dog, it can only control like dogs. Like it can't, it's very specific. Anyway, so that is the whole idea behind the Godstones. And so it all came to me at once, and it actually came to me, they were called Star Stones at first, I believe. And then it switched to Godstones. And so basically there's a whole lore behind these stones. And essentially what happened is this is set on it's a fantasy, but it's set on a far future Earth. And there was something called the First Fall, which was where all of these meteorites, there was basically a meteor shower, and it all hit Earth. And within that storm, there were the Godstones. So that was the first time they came to Earth. And it basically completely changed the whole face of the planet. It brought magic, quote unquote, to Earth. And that's really how it all started. But the premise of the Godstones is actually based a little bit, well, very vaguely on science. So if you know, like, there's matter and antimatter, as it exists in our universe, there's matter and antimatter. The Godstones are essentially anti-energy. So there's energy, which is an output, but the Godstones, their ability is an input. It's the ability to absorb whatever they hit. So that's kind of the logic behind it. That's not so much explained in the book, but it's the logic that lives in my head. So, but the Godstones are in part like any form of energy. They can't be created or destroyed. So they do have their own life cycle, which is explored in book 2. So yeah.
Oh, I love that. Okay, that's an exciting point to bring up because and we won't touch any more on this, but I just want to say that I am very interested in finding out more about the life cycles of the stones and knowing a little bit more about if stones can transfer, or all the questions about stones, you know, that I'm sure you will bring up and answer throughout the series. But and speaking of, is this going to be more than is this going to be a trilogy, a longer series? Is it just a duology?
So it's a planned trilogy. I have started writing, actually, book 3 is like in a pretty good zero draft state, but it is book 3's I'm flying through book 3, which is great. So it's a planned trilogy. It's going to end at book 3, but there's going to be more books in the world. So I already have a book outlined for in the past, and there's going to be a trilogy that happens in the future as well. So, but this particular series is a trilogy.
Very cool. Some question, there's questions in my mind, but I feel like I can't ask a couple of them for plot reasons. But those are questions I can send to you on my own, if you want to mention it. But I'd love to talk a little bit more about, since this is a trilogy, you know, you have book 1 is out. Book two was supposed to be out November 30th, and something changed. I'd love to know a little bit more about the reason behind and the process of you having to make that decision, that hard decision to pull that book from publication before the date.
Yeah, so book 2. So it's really interesting because I feel like I've struggled with book 2 more than I've struggled with any book, because All the King's Traitors, while it's my first published book, it's not the first book I've written. But damn, sequels are hard. And so book 2, I really struggled with. And it was complete to the point where developmental edits were done and everything was integrated from developmental edits, etc. At the end of the summer. And then essentially over the past few months, I've just been really busy, and it's not so much that it's just not there yet. Like, I haven't personally spent enough time on book 2 where I could put it out and be as proud of it as I am as All the King's Traitors, because like I said, I love book 2. The plot of book 2 is quick and fast and adventurous, and I think it's a lot more. I'm not saying All the King's Traitors is not exciting, but I think book 2 is much more exciting. But it's just not at the same caliber of professionalism. I haven't been able to spend enough time on it. And then so what was happening was I got in a little bit of a cycle, right? Where I just like didn't have the time to put into it, or didn't allocate, I should probably say, didn't allocate the time to put into it. And then things just obviously wouldn't get done. Like, that's the cycle. Don't put enough time into it, things wouldn't get done. So I'm hoping that I can spend the next little while really polishing it up, because I'm still hoping to have book 3 out when I want to have book 3 out, which means I need to get book 2 out quickly. But eventually, like, I just made the decision to delay book 2 because it's not at the standard I want it to be at. And I think, I mean, I was thinking about this over the course of the past few weeks. One of the decisions that I made with book 2 to kind of move through it quicker was to forego beta readers for book 2, which I think was a mistake. And so I'm rethinking that a little bit. Obviously now it's kind of past the point of beta reading, but it might be something that I go to I don't know if there's something after beta reading, or maybe it's late stage beta reading where I get folks to take a look, take a read, and help me try and figure out, like, there's just something that's not clicking and I don't know what it
Yeah.
is. And so that's why it's delayed, but I'm hoping to get it out as soon as possible because, like I said, I love the plot of this book, but I just don't, there's something not there yet. And
Yeah.
one of my big focuses this book was actually characters, because I think, and rightfully so, the biggest critiques that I receive are about my characters. And so that was something I was really trying to focus on, and maybe I'm just like hyper focused on it, and that's really what I want to shine in this book. And maybe it's also a little bit because it's something that I'm not the greatest at, or I'm working to get better at, and so it leaves me a little uncertain.
No, that's fair. And I have to say, while you may think that that the characters might not be as strong as some of the other things, I very much enjoy your characters and the world and the idea itself. And I think that I remember when I finished it, I think it was like a week or two before the 30th. So I was like, perfect, right in time.
I'm so sorry.
And then I saw your post and I was like, oh no. But like I was like kind of disappointed because that, just to tell people, like, I enjoyed the book that much that I was disappointed, and but now I'm excited to know that it's coming. It's just coming a little later. So
Yeah. I mean, ideally, it comes out in fairly short order. I've got a whole bunch of time to work on it, set up in the near future, and really get it to a place where I'm happy with it, and then run it through one last round of like professional editing, but it's going to be more like a proofread. And one of the big things I wanted to do with this book too, that I didn't do with all the King's Traitors, was have a sensitivity reader go through it. So have that done as well. But both of those kind of rounds, like, they won't, well, I don't know. Maybe the editor sensitivity reader is going to like notice something that I didn't notice. And it's going to like cause like a total like off track course thing where I have to go in and change something fundamental, but that hasn't happened. That hasn't happened to me in this story yet. So I'm hoping that it all goes smoothly, because I really want to have book 3 out by my birthday next year. So we're trying to do this quick.
And I hope that that's the case. I very much look forward to book 2 and then eventually book 3. But MC, as I have to say, I really appreciate you coming so very often, and having such great questions throughout the lives. He has a couple here, so I'm gonna read them all, and then you can answer as you can. So he's saying, Keylin, you've self-published. What's the most challenging aspects of the business? And then what was the critique about your characters, and how did you ameliorate?
So toughest thing about the business is making money. That's for sure. It's just knowing, because I do have a job outside of writing for me. So this is very personal to me. I have a job outside of writing. So what's difficult is running my writing like a business versus a hobby, because I could just, I could fund my whole writing business if I just wanted to like throw money in the hole. I could do that, but that's not what I'm trying to do here. So I'm trying to be really good about budgeting, and I think that's my toughest thing, because like, let's say I'm like, oh, I want to get X, and then I'm like, oh, well, I can just pay for it with like my savings, but that's not what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to pay for it with the money that I make off of my book. So for me right now, that's the toughest thing. It's just like actually trying to reframe and run this like a business, because I do want to make money, versus just having it as a hobby that I do in addition to my day-to-day job. Because I think that as a self-published author, like, sometimes as creatives, we don't necessarily have the business mindset. And personally, like, I'm a creative, but I'm also like science, and science isn't business. Like, they might both be analytical, but it's not business. It's not finance. So yeah, it's really that kind of like shift. So I think that's the most challenging. And the next
The
question
critique
was,
about your characters and how did you ameliorate? Yeah.
yeah, so my biggest, well, I'm kind of just like tallying up all the critiques that I hear about all the King's Traitors in my head. And when it comes down to it, like the characters are just the weakest aspect of my writing. And I see that. It's for a multitude of reasons. Like one, it is because characters are the weakest point in my writing, and two, it's because I write multi POV, so it's really hard to it's harder to connect with characters in multi POV because there is a large cast of them, so you get to spend less time with them. So it's a combination of that. So how I'm going about getting better is when I wrote book 2. Actually, I have it right next to me. I've got like such a convenient shelf. My developmental letter that I asked for. I asked my developmental editor to really focus on the characters. And so she basically sent me like a mini novel in and of itself,
Oh, wow.
and really went through and not like, she wouldn't necessarily say like, this is how you can change it to make it better, but it's more like, this is what's lacking here, and this is like this is the dynamic that I see between these characters, or this is the internal conflict that I see with this character, stuff like that. And so I've really been, I think we can learn a lot from the people that we work with, and so really taking the editor's feedback and trying to incorporate that into my novel.
Yeah, that's great. And I know that like developmental editors are such a big help, especially early on,
Yeah,
because the world, you know, as much as you think you know your own world and your characters, it's hard to really sit down and read your own work without forgetting that the reader doesn't know everything that you do. So,
totally.
and that might be the hard part. But now I'm starting to think we will be going over the hour. Is that okay with you?
That's fine. Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, then I'm just going to power right through. So speaking of sequels, let's talk a little bit about crafting sequels and what makes sequels so hard.
I think it's getting it right. For me personally, I think it's getting it right. I think it's getting all of the details right. Like, I think I'm very meticulous about all of the details and loose ends. So like I mentioned, All the King's Traitors is multi POV. So All the King's Traitors has 6 points of view. And there's a lot of different stories, and there's 6 points of view, but then each of those characters also has kind of their inner circle of friends, or like the cast that surrounds them, that also needs to have their own stories.
Hmm.
So I mean, if you extrapolate that, there's like, I don't know, like 20-30 characters who need to have like um detailed stories and detailed plot lines and character arcs. And so I think writing book 2, like that's one of the most difficult parts for me when it comes to writing book 2, is satisfying all of those different plot line, or like getting those plot lines to a point where I'm satisfied. And also just making sure that I'm doing like the characters and the plot justice. And I think that book 2 is going to be bigger. That's like, I feel like that's just, it's going to be bigger. And so that's one of the things that I find difficult as well. Also, the fear of it not being as good as book 1 is real. So that's a
Yeah,
real thing that exists.
no, I understand that. I'm not quite to the point that you are, I think, in that I don't have a fully finished book two to just fix, slightly edit. I'm more in the drafting phase, but I think I've gotten about 30 or 30% or so of the main outline ready to go. But I think the toughest thing for me, at least in drafting the sequel, is really deciding on where the story's going, more so than not, because I have a tough time deciding on things sometimes, and that's why I think it took me so long when I was pantsing, because I'd be like, no, wait, what if they do this, or what if they do that, and then you spend so much time on these what ifs that you don't focus on the thing that they just decide and then push through. For
Yeah.
me, at least, that's what I got to tell myself, because um, uh, I have all these ideas, but that doesn't matter at the end of the day if none of them lead to the finished product. So there's that, and then also I think the fear of it not being as good as book 1 is always going to be there, especially when you've already received praise from people and expectations. Um, but I will say that it's nice to get those questions and expectations from your ARC readers or beta readers about what will happen in book two, because little author secret, sometimes what you might say you think might happen, we could potentially use as a plot device eventually later on, because we thought that's a good idea. We probably should take it that way.
Yeah, yeah. Book two. I'm just like listening to all of it. I'm like, oh, book two. Yeah, book twos are tough. Book twos are tough. Sequels are tough. I also like, because I'm writing a trilogy. I don't know if your novel Lane is a planned trilogy, but because I'm
It
writing
is.
a okay. Book two's kind of like the middle. Like it's like the middle for me in a novel is very difficult. So I feel like with book two for me, I had book one, I've got book three fully formed. It's kind of like the grand finale. And then I felt like my very first iteration of book two was just getting everybody from here to here, and like nothing, it was a lot of like movement and stuff happening, but it wasn't like coherent. It didn't follow like a nice like arc. It didn't really have any story. It didn't really have any structure. It was just like a whole bunch of shit happening to get to
Yeah.
book three. And so that is also what I found difficult about book two, was it was the middle, and it was tough.
The middle is the slump, right? That's the act two is always the hardest. But sometimes the most important in the sequence, right? Because if book two, that's another fear I think with sequels so much is if book two is not up to par, people may not finish the trilogy.
Yeah.
I mean, that even happens with like the Divergent series and Hunger Games for a lot of people, and all these other very well-known YA trilogies, that you have these diehard fans that either love or hate book two, and then they'll finish it or not finish the series.
Totally.
But yeah, so many things when it comes to sequels and multiple other books. I'm starting to understand the people who write standalones and duologies a little better. But so speaking of you, sorry, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, at one point when I was at my most desperate with this book, I was almost a little bit like, screw it, I'm just gonna make this like 600 pages and it's gonna be book two and three together. That did not happen. It's gonna be a trilogy.
And we've talked about it. We've already talked a little bit about your current work in progress, because you're working on polishing the sequel, and then book three is in the work already. But do you have another another series that you're working on, another standalone, anything in the works?
Yeah, so I've got a standalone fantasy romance in the conception phase. I've like started the first chapter. It's not far. I have a hard sci-fi drafted, and honestly, I love this story so much. It is so wonderful, but I'm not at the point yet where I think I have the skill to execute it to the level at which I want it to be. It's just, it's very nuanced. And so I think I'm going to, I have shelved it, and I'm going to wait for down the line where I can come back to it and take a look at it with fresh eyes, probably after I'm done the High Wings series, and take a look at it with fresh eyes, because I'm not sure I'm there yet as an author. Like, this is like one of the books that I want to like really write to the best of my ability. Not that I don't do that with every book, but I don't know. It's just like, it's like a headline book in my mind. And to be frank, right now, it's like really not that good. Like, the story's great. If I handed you the outline right now, you'd be like, wow, that's a really cool story. And then if you read it, you'd be like, never mind. So
right.
It's on the shelf. I'll come back to it later.
That's good. And sometimes that's what we need, right? We need to put that thing on the shelf, let it mature a little bit, get some rest from our mind, and then come back fresh, and then we'll see we'll see the light through the tunnel, right?
Yeah, totally.
And MC is asking, is it a good idea to create subplot to get over the muddy middle? I would be inclined to say absolutely.
100%. I have so many subplots and plots, and I don't even know what the main plot is anymore. So there's just way too many plots in book two. That's, I think, also another problem that I have.
I think when you think of a series and you're trying to plot everybody's arc, it almost looks like spaghetti on the page, right?
Yeah.
Trying. connect everyone and everything. But as we move toward the Q&A, which I love that we've been getting so many questions as we've been going. This is great. Keep them coming if you have them. But I'd love to read the blurb for all the King's Traitors as you find the spot that you're going to share with us tonight. And then we'll get into the book a little bit, get a little sneak peek from you, and then move into the formal live Q&A. But the blurb as it goes for all the King's Traitors. First off, Kirkus Reviews calls it an intricate, fast-paced tale that's full of history and magic. And it was a winner of the Indie Brag Medallion. A multi-POV epic fantasy adventure. In quotes, you would be wise to question your god, end quotes. Over 1,000 years have passed since the first godstones ripped through the skies and mangled the earth. With their fall came centuries of chaos and destruction, but also immense power. Power that separates humans from gods. Now, in the kingdom of Azanthia, 2 adoptive brothers flee from unjust conscription. A fugitive struggles to truly be free. A double-crossing warrior must choose where his allegiances lie, with his wife or with his daughter. A traitorous heir to the kingdom's throne roams the lands in search of an army to call his own. A prodigy in the house of Historian competes in a grueling trial to prove her loyalty. And one God King rules over them all. And now a little snippet of all the King's Traitors.
All right. I hope this isn't too long. It's only a few pages. And I apologize, everyone, reading out loud. It's not my forte. Ion took the lead and Kuba jogged behind. They ran in silence through the trees, every so often Ion checking to see if Kuba was keeping up. Even though Ion was injured, Kuba was small and had trouble matching his long strides. The forest was getting darker and as the sun set behind the thick canopy of trees. Ion hadn't realized it was already so late, but he was thankful for the cover the darkness provided. If anyone noticed they were gone, they would have a tough time finding them in this light. Ion was leading them towards their favorite hunting spot, a solitary cave at the base of Mount Zar. Ion had never run into another person there. It would be perfect for now. It wasn't long before Ion broke out onto the pebbly shore of the nearby creek. He caught a glimpse of the darkening sky and stopped dead in his tracks. He felt Kuba slam into his back and heard him fall to the ground. Ouch! Ion, what the? Ion heard his little brother, but he was already moving closer to the creek for a better view. In just a half hour, the clear red sky had flooded with the darkest clouds he had ever seen. The lightning flashed, jumping from cloud to cloud, just waiting to strike the earth. He couldn't help but gape for a moment. This would be a terrible storm. The first loud roar of thunder clattered through the air, and Ion had to clamp his hands over his ears. Seconds later, a thick streak of lightning came flashing down towards a tree in the forest in front of them. It split the mammoth evergreen clean in two, and thunder cracked loudly overhead. Ion, Cooper whispered, horrified. Ion stared at the tree, its two halves collapsing into its neighbors as flames rose. The fire caught the dry needles of a dead pine and crackled violently, consuming it in an instant. He grabbed the collar of his brother's shirt. Kuba, get up. Kuba froze on the ground, petrified. Kuba, get up, Ion shouted, launching his brother onto his feet. His bruised muscles ached with the effort. He put his hand on Kuba's shaking shoulders. Sorry, guys, little tongue twister. He needed to think fast. Where could they go? The cave with its clearing was their only option. It was still quite far, but they had to try. Remember our hunting spot? We've got to get there now. Ion watched his brother's eyes finally veer from the storm and lock with his gaze. He pushed the little guy ahead of him. Run, let's go. Kuba didn't even nod. He just turned and darted. Ion was immediately on his tail. The two brothers sprinted through the forest, dodging the trees and stumbling on roots, the sounds of thunder trailing them and the flashes of lightning brightening their way. Ion kept looking over his shoulder, but no matter how fast they seemed to run, the fire kept getting bigger and closer. If they could make it to the clearing in front of the cave, the fire wouldn't be able to reach them. They would be safe. A giant bolt of lightning crashed about 40 feet to their right. Ion quickly looked to his left, searching for Kuba. His younger brother was running just behind, following him. They'd be at the cave in a few minutes, and if they kept the pace up. Come on, Kuba, Ion shouted at his brother, who was seeming to be slipping behind. He looked ahead and he could see the clearing, almost there. Ion sprinted into the small rocky space and whipped around to the spot to spot his brother. Just as Kuba came sprinting out into the empty clearing, a roar of thunder rocked the entire forest, and a stroke of brilliant gold came crashing down on him. It was not normal lightning. The beam of gold crackled as it hit the ground and bounced in all directions. The force launched Ion into the side of the mountain. He hit it with an audible thud and fell limply to the ground. He was barely conscious as he wearily lifted himself onto his hands and knees, searching for his younger brother amongst the scattered rubble. Branches and rocks littered the ground, and the air was thick with smoke. Through the debris, he spotted Kuba's mess of hair, right where he had been struck down. His throat constricted at the sight of his brother lying motionless on the rocky ground. Ion's body seared with pain as he used the rock face to pull him up from his hands and pull him up to his hands and knees, his eyes never leaving his brother. He had to get to him. Kuba let out a cough, and Ion's heart jolted with relief, and then he moved. Ion erupted in tears, watching happily as the young boy pushed himself up onto his knees. He yelled out, but the sound of the receding thunder drowned out his voice. Suddenly, Ion realized something was wrong with his brother. Kuba was frantically searching the ground, his hands sweeping over the rocky surface. Ion pushed himself off the mountainside to step towards him, but he was too weak. He took a few uncoordinated steps forward and then painfully crashed to the ground. He tilted his head up from the dirt, looking through the smoke and focused on his brother's face. Something was very wrong. Kuba looked blank. Ion followed Kuba's gaze, and that's when he noticed the shining golden rock glowing right in front of his brother. Kuba was scrambling for it, for the object that had fallen from the sky, the thing that had almost killed him. His brother was memorized by it. No, not memorized, possessed. His brother reached out for the glowing rock. This was all wrong. Kuba, Ion tried to yell, though his chest was so tight, hardly any air came out. Don't touch it. But Kuba was in a trance-like state, and Ion watched as his little brother's hand closed around the glowing stone. Then lightning erupted from the ground, and everything went white. And that's it.
All right. That is exactly the spot I kind of expected you to read from. So I love that, and it automatically brings up a few questions, I think, and wants us to read immediately. And this leads me into just a couple questions I got from my story, and then if we have any questions from the Q&A before we go into the giveaway. Well, MC asked earlier on, and I wanted to make sure that this got answered, but he wanted to know if the most common powers were then water and earth because of the fall.
Yeah, so there are certainly godstones that are much more common than others. Water definitely being one of them, earth being another. There's a couple fire wielders that's a little bit more rare, but because, you know, when the first fall happened and when other falls happen, the meteorites, sometimes it's not just the godstones, sometimes there's other rocks, and then it creates, like, they hit things and there's fires and there's lightning and there's storms. And so fire is pretty common as well. But yes, there's like rare godstones where people are like, this is the only one that we've ever seen of this kind before. There's also oddly specific godstones that hit like something that's very particular. So they might seem a little bit useless, but they're not. So yes, there are more common ones for sure.
There was a question, and I believe that this person may be related to you. They said, "Who is your favorite sibling?" I think it's me.
Well, so that's either my brother or my sister, but I don't have. I love them both, so I don't have a favorite.
I think it was your sister that had said that.
Probably.
But I just thought it was funny. And then, which godstone would you want for yourself?
Ooh. I mean, honestly, just because of the way it was written, I think I would probably, and I don't want to tell you what godstone it is because you find out really early on in the book, like in chapter 1, but I think it's a kind of cool reveal. It would be Valak's godstone, just because I think like the way he uses it is very creative, and I would hope to use it like that myself, to be totally honest. There's godstones that are definitely more powerful than his, but he uses it in a way that weaponizes it really well. Not that I would really want it as a weapon, but.
MC says, "Is there a lightning godstone? I'd have that." I think you'll have to wait and see. But I actually, I, I would have to either agree with you on Valix. I also, it's a three-way tie for me, which is just because, and I'm not going to mention what they are, but uh, I don't know if I can even give names because I don't know how much of a. I'll say the Prodigy in the House of Historian that is mentioned in the blurb. I would take theirs, or there's someone very close to Valak that I also would take.
Yeah.
Yeah, until everyone reads the book, I don't want to spoil it, but and then last question before we get into the giveaway: best advice to teens looking to become authors.
That's a great question. I think my piece of advice would be to write as much as you can. And if it's something you want to go for, just go for it. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but fan fiction's a really great place to start. Like, it's a really good, if you are new to writing entirely, fan fiction is a really wonderful place to start. If you want to write your own original work, go for it. I think like one of the best things that you could do if you want to be an author is just to write. And I would also recommend, like, while yes, there's plenty of like writing assignments that you have to do in school and all those things, like write the things that you're passionate about. And so if those aren't the school assignments, like write outside of school and stuff like that. So just get started.
Absolutely, I love that. And to add on just a tad bit, just check out yourself and others on YouTube and various blogs. There's a lot of indie authors out there that are helpful and helping and love to help young writers. So feel free to ask because the community will answer. So, I just want to make sure we're still good in the. Okay, cool. So as we get into the Q&A, I just want to remind everybody this was day 11 of 12 of the 12 Days of the Delivery Company. And this is all in celebration of my upcoming release for the young adult novel, The Delivery Company, which releases officially tomorrow. But fun fact for everybody watching, the paperback actually went live just a tad early on Amazon due to you have to hit it between 24 and 72 hours. So I took the risk and it's actually live right now. So for $14.99, you can order your paperback, and the ebook is $4.99, which will be going up to $6.99 tomorrow after release day. So get it while you can. And with that,
I was gonna try and bring it up. I was gonna try and bring it up on my screen, but it's not working out.
That's okay. But with that, we have our winner of tonight's giveaway. The winner is Joy of Macro. So congratulations, you are our giveaway winner. You have won a signed paperback copy, actually. That's a change from what we had originally said. So you get a signed copy of All the King's Traitors. Congratulations. Just message me with your email/address, which I will get over to Keylin. And Keylin, before we end this, any parting words for everyone?
No, just thank you so much for coming, everybody. Make sure to order Lane's book and add it on Goodreads. Go to Goodreads, add it on Goodreads. And also, if you can, pro tip, if Lane, like, if you want to like help the algorithm, one of the things you can do is actually go to Amazon.com, type in the title, search it, and purchase it that way. That helps with the, I don't know why, but someone told me that helps with the algorithm because it lets like the algorithm gods know that people are like going and typing in and searching for it. So the Delivery Co. is the name. So go and search that in the search bar and purchase. That's the last thing I have to say.
Thank you so much, Keylin. And it's been so great talking with you, getting to meet you, and learning just a little bit more about the High Wings series. So thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you so much for having me, and have a blast at the, well, I guess it's at noon tomorrow, and tomorrow's a Saturday. So I will definitely drop in. I'm not going to be at work. So have a blast at the big launch party tomorrow.
Thank you so much. Good night, everybody.
Night, everyone.